First things first, let's just talk a little bit about Android itself. Android refers to a collection of software components that run on mobile devices like phones or tablets. It's the operating system and other software that provides the operating environment to do things like accept a phone call, send email, text messages, or run apps. Now, it's important to remember that Android is a platform and not a specific device. Like an iPhone, when you say iPhone, it's one specific device. Android can be a number of hardware devices. Android is the system that runs on all these different types of hardware. There are a lot of manufacturers that make phones that run Android, and most of the manufacturers take the stock Android and then they customize it in some way to give it their own unique flavor. Sometimes for the better, a lot of times for the worse, depends on who you ask. So a Samsung Android, for example, it looks and runs a little bit differently than, say, an HTC Android phone. I wanted to show a few quick statistics about Android because the iPhone gets a lot of the media attention here in the US, but Android is a really thriving platform, and there's a lot of opportunity to develop some great apps on it and get in front of a lot of users. So I'm going to switch over, and we're going to take a look. So if we look at just the US first, we see that Android has a 52% market share of the smartphone market. Now, worldwide, it's a little bit more. It's up to 68% currently from the latest numbers, whereas worldwide Apple is only at 17%. The third stat here is hardware manufacturers for both smartphones and non-smartphone. Samsung is in the lead in this case. They have about 25% of the cell phone hardware from the worldwide market. LG is in second place with about 18%, and Apple is around third place in the world with around 17%. So the main question we got from Treehouse members was, how do I get started? Well, that's why I'm here. We're developing an Android course where you can know absolutely nothing about Android. You don't even need to know anything about programming. All you need is a computer, an internet connection, and some time to watch the videos. And then I'll walk you through step by step how to get started with the Android tools and how to create and build your very first Android app. The goal is to get you coding a real app that's fun to use and to get you introduced and comfortable with all the tools and the language for Android development. Now, you can develop Android apps in a number of different languages, but the primary language used is Java. So we're going to cover Java as the language itself, how to program in Java, and then inside the context of Android, how to program in Java so that you can run it on an app. So the first site I want to show you is the official Android documentation from Google. It's the developer.android.com, and it has all sorts of information on how to design and develop Android applications. Now, it may be a little bit overwhelming at first, but they've tried to organize it in a way where it's easy to come in and see exactly what you're looking for. They've got a section here for design, and it has a whole set of revamped design guidelines on how to design your app so that it looks and feels like an Android application, not just an iPhone application that was ported over. They have the developer section, which shows you how to install and set up your Android development environment and how to tackle different things that are common to Android development, like whether it's getting data from the internet or taking pictures, things like that. The last section over here is the distribution section, and that's when you want to sell your app on Google Play, whether it's free or whether you're going to charge a price for it. This is where you come to set up your account and learn how to upload your app and put it on the Google Play Store. Now, there's some additional information that's really helpful. If you go to the Develop tab, good place to get started, the Androidology video playlist over here. If you click on that, there's a series of 3 short videos that just talk about Android at a high level, Android architecture, the life cycle of an application, and some common APIs. So this is a great place to come get an overview of Android development, and then you can dive in with the Treehouse videos. Likewise, over here on the left, they've got this developer news section, and in here there's a link to the Android blog. Usually the blog posts are posted there in the news. And here, a couple times a month, they'll usually update the blog with the latest news about Android development. So even as a beginner, it's a good idea to come in here and get familiar with this and to see what the latest news is. Even if it doesn't make sense, as long as you're reading through it and picking it up, you can start to kind of absorb it and have the pieces all kind of fall in place. Now, the next site I want to show you is from a developer. It's called Vogela.com, and he's a developer from Germany, and he's involved with Android and Eclipse development. And he's got this site of really helpful tutorials for how to get started, as well as some training exercises and some common things to look at. He's got links to books as well. Again, it's a good place to come when you just want to start at the very beginning and see how to get started with your application. It can fill out some of the details that you may not be able to get from reading through the Google documentation. Now, a common place to go for help. So once you do start developing, of course you're going to run into some problems. And the best resource for troubleshooting with Android development is Stack Overflow. So if you haven't been there before, Stack Overflow is a website for programmers, developers, designers, where you can go and you can ask questions to a huge community, and you can get answers. Answers get upvoted, and they get weighted based on people's reputation. So it's really helpful. It's got a really strong Android group. Google used to have an official Android group that was ported over to Stack Overflow. So this is where the official Android support comes from. Now, I get most of my news from Twitter. I've got a cultivated Android list of Android developers, Android websites, blogs, where I come and I see what the latest news is. And I'm going to share that here on my screen as well. So if you check out my Twitter handle at BenDog24, you can look at my lists, and I've got this Android list, and it's got a bunch of people who are involved in the Android community, some who work for Google, other popular Android websites. And this is a good place to come get the latest news again, and some places to get started as well. The last thing I want to cover is if you're somebody who likes to read a book and work through a book, my favorite Android book is called Professional Android Development by Reto Meier, and he's a developer on the Android project. And this is a fantastic book. I haven't worked all the way through all the exercises, but as a reference, it's really great, as well as the first few chapters on getting started with Android development. It has a really detailed explanation about how it all works together. It's an easy read, it's an entertaining read, and then it gets into some really nice examples that you can work through to get comfortable with all the basic building blocks of Android development. Okay, so let's look at some other maybe common questions for people who are new to Android development. What do you need? We kind of talked about that. I said all you need is a computer, an internet connection, and some time. Now to get started, there's a few components you need from Android. One is called the Android SDK. And then you need some kind of editor. Eclipse is the recommended IDE for Android development. You don't have to use Eclipse. You can use IntelliJ or some other IDE. Or if you want, there are command line tools. So you can write in your favorite text editor and then use the Android command line tools to compile your apps and build them that way. But we'll be using Eclipse in the Treehouse videos. And instead of making you go out and get all those individual pieces and put them together and follow the documentation on Google's website, we've bundled them all together into one zip file that we're going to make available on the Treehouse website, where you can go and just get the zip file, unzip it, run Eclipse, and be ready to go. It's a one-stop shop, and it should make it a lot easier to just get the ball rolling to get started with Android development. Another common question people have is, do I need an Android phone to develop Android apps? And fortunately, you don't. The Android tools include a really powerful Android emulator that you can run on your computer. Now, it's really powerful, but it's also a little bit slow. So there are some ways to speed up your emulator and how it runs on your computer. For that, there's a lot of documentation on that Google website we looked at. But you don't need a phone. You can just get started with Eclipse or whatever Android tool you want, and then you can run your app that you're working on the emulator. So there's zero cost to get started. Now, if you do want a phone, there are some options to get one unlocked where you don't need to have a contract with a cell phone carrier. So there's you may have heard of the Google Nexus, which is the Google-sanctioned high-end phones and tablets that run stock Android. So the latest Nexus phone is called the Galaxy Nexus. You can get that from Google Play, and it's running the latest version of Android, which is called Jelly Bean. It's Android 4.1. You can see the price here is currently $350. Now, sometimes you can find these cheaper on eBay or other sites, maybe at Amazon.com. But if you want to get a brand new Google Nexus, you can go right here to Google Play and find it there. Now, again, you can find other unlocked phones on eBay or Amazon where it's not tied to a carrier. You can get the phone and you can use it for development. My first Android phone that I used for development was an old Samsung Moment, and I just got it off of unlocked from eBay, and I was able to use it for development. And then now I have a Samsung Galaxy S3. It's through AT&T, but it's a great phone, so that's my recommendation if you're looking to get a brand new Android phone. Although there's plenty more coming out too, so You always want to see what's on the horizon. How much does it cost to develop? Not a penny. You can get started with, again, just downloading the tools and start programming. You can create an account with Google, and you can upload to Google Play for free. So there's zero cost to entry. Now, if you wanted to make your app available on the Amazon App Store, there is a fee and a review process similar to how the Apple and iPhone app review process works. So with the Amazon App Store, you have to sign up for a developer account. You pay $100 per year for an annual developer license, and then you upload your app to the Amazon App Store, and they have to review it before they'll put it in the Amazon App Store. So how do you publish your app on the Google Play Store or the Amazon App Store? It's actually pretty straightforward. Even though there's a review process with Amazon, all you have to do is, with your account, you go to the submission form, you fill out all the fields about your app, you can upload some screenshots if you want, and then you attach the Android APK file. That's everything for your Android application gets built into this APK file, an Android package file, and that's what you hand off to the app stores, and that's what they use to post for users to download. Now, a lot of people ask, do I have to use Java when I'm writing an Android app? And no, you don't. It's the recommended language. I think most apps most apps for Android are written using Java, but you can take your existing skill set and you can use it in different ways on Android devices. So, for example, we've got if you really want to do something in C#, there's a program called MonoDroid. I'm not sure how active it is, but it's one way to try out getting an app developed with C# and .NET. If you want to try Ruby, there's a framework called Rubato provided by IBM where you can develop an app in Ruby and run it on an Android device. For Python, there's a framework called Kivy you can use where you write your app in Python and then you can, again, run it on Android. And lastly, a really popular one is a way of using your web technology to create an app. So there's two main players. PhoneGap and Titanium are two popular ones that people use to write HTML and JavaScript and then convert it into an app. There's some other ones as well. And the idea there is you can write it, your UI is written in HTML and CSS, and then you can use JavaScript to do your animations and your UI interaction. PhoneGap just wraps around the HTML and puts it on the device inside of like a native shell, but the Titanium actually takes your code that you write in HTML and JavaScript and then compiles it down and makes it a native binary that you can run. So that you get a little better performance there, but it's a little harder to, I think it's a little bit harder to pick up. If you do want to use your web development skills to create an app, the next question is, do you want to create just a mobile web application, a full native application, or something in between? So we were just looking at PhoneGap and Titanium. PhoneGap, on the one hand, is one way to use a web application wrapped inside of a native shell. So that's what's known as a hybrid application, because you're getting a hybrid of the native outside with the web technology inside. So there's some pros and cons to each of those. For the hybrid approach, some of the pros are that you get to reuse your code. It's the web technology that you're already comfortable with. You can kind of bridge the gap between some of the hardware features with the native shell that you're using. Now the cons are that it's not as quick as a full native application. Because you've got this extra layer on top, the UI isn't quite as responsive, and it's not as there can be noticeable delays in how you interact with the UI. Another con is that it's if you're developing it to be cross-platform, if you want to run one code base on Android and iOS and maybe even Windows Phone, you lose some of that device-specific or platform-specific look and feel, and your users may not be happy with that. A lot of Android users will see an iPhone app that's just been ported and be unhappy that it doesn't take advantage of some of the Android platform design guidelines. Now, if you want to do just a simple web application, just a mobile website, that way you can run on anything. The pros there are, mobile website, you've got all of your regular mobile web technologies. You can control the releases. You've got the back end. You can control all your source code. If you need to fix a bug, it's right there. There's nothing on the user's device. But the cons for that are then you're dependent on the internet connection. It's certainly not as responsive. You've got the lag from the network connections. And again, lag from the HTML UI. You also can't access all of the hardware features of the device. So that, one of the real fun and powerful features of any native platform is the ability to tap into things like the camera, accelerometer, audio and video, things like that. Now, some of that you can do with the web technologies, but it's not quite up to the full breadth of the hardware features, and it's probably always going to be behind with what you can access with the native applications. So the native applications, that's native meaning that it's native to the device it's running on. That's where you code in Java, or in iOS you code in Objective-C, and it compiles down to the machine code, and it's running the ones and zeros on the actual kernel of the operating system. That gives you, that's the quickest app you're going to have. It's the most responsive. It's full access to the hardware features, and it's got the, if you do it that way, you're going to get the full platform experience that your users want as well. The cons to that is that it's a little bit of a learning curve. If you don't know Java or Objective-C, in the case of iPhone, you've got to get up to speed with a new language. You've got to learn some new APIs. You can't control the updates as easily. So if you're releasing your app to the App Store, and that's how your users get it, then they have to come to the App Store and download the update. And they may turn on automatic updates, but still, you can't guarantee that your users are going to have your latest version of the code out there. It also means that you may have a separate code base for each platform. So you might have to have one complete set of code for Android, and then another one for iOS, another one for Windows Phone, or whatever other platform you may be targeting. So it just depends on, it depends on what you're comfortable doing, what your users want, what you're willing to invest. I've seen a lot of good apps built with all the different technologies. So with a little bit of time and elbow grease, you can make a good app on most of these platforms. I obviously highly recommend going native whenever you can, because that gives you the best user experience. And the really good user experience is what you're after if you want people to use your app and tell people about it and want to come to you for services. I thought I'd finish up with a few app recommendations. If you're looking for some new apps to download, these are some of my personal favorites. The first one I wanted to mention is a new Twitter app for Android called TweetLanes. It's still in beta, but it's got a lot of the functionality of the main Twitter app, and it's a really nice design. So the tagline here is Pure Twitter, Pure Android. It followed the Android design guidelines very closely to give a really nice Android experience with all the best practices for user interfaces. The next app I want to show you is called Pocket Casts. This is what I use for podcasts on my Android phone. And the reason I like this one is because it's got a lot of features built in to manage your subscriptions. It's got auto downloading. If you subscribe to a podcast feed, you can control whether it's downloading on over Wi-Fi only, or if you want to use your cell data plan for that. It also has some nice UI components that make it really easy to skip around within the podcast. It's got some big buttons that overlay. You can quickly see, what's going on, what the description of the podcast, and how to fast forward and rewind, and how to switch between podcasts. The next app used to be called Read It Later. They changed the name to Pocket. This is one of those apps where you can save things to the cloud and then pick them up and read them offline, whether it's on your phone or you can go to it from the browser. But it's a really easy to use. It's integrated so that when you, let's say you're in the browser and you're reading an article that you really like, you tap on the share button, and then there's add to Pocket. It puts it up there on the cloud, puts it offline on your device so that you can come back and just check it out later, or you can pick it up somewhere else from another device. The next one here is social GPS app called Waze. This is fantastic because it takes real-time data from fellow Waze users. So if you're in an area that has a lot of people using this application, and it's got a pretty good user base, you can get real-time traffic and other warnings, things to avoid. It's a little bit of a battery drain, like any GPS application on a phone, but it's really worth it if you want to, be able to avoid traffic on your commute to work or things like that. Now, the last thing I want to cover are a couple of games I really like. The first one is a fantastic game called Wind Up Night. It's actually been around a little while, but the reason I wanted to highlight this one specifically is this is an example of an application that was first created for Android before it was ported to iOS. And a lot of times games will first, developers will first target iOS because there was, and I guess still is, a larger market for games on iOS devices, but that's changing, and this is an example of that. We've got the Wind Up Night for Android first. It's a side-scrolling game. It's really fun. My 3-year-old enjoys it, and I enjoy it. So that's all I've got for today. Thanks a lot for listening. Thank you for submitting your questions as well. I hope you really enjoy the Android content that's coming out, and feel free to email me or find me on Twitter with any questions as a follow-up to this, or when the videos come out when you're following along, certainly let me know how you like it or if you have any questions. Thanks.